this final keynote wants to bring in together everything we've heard today, and is from Daphne Dragona. We have been working from time to time for several years, and yeah, her theme is Can Arts Degrow? And yeah, it's up to you, Daphne. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Oop, does it? Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for staying. Thank you very much for the invitation, Vasily. A big thanks also to David Berger and to Natasha Alcuriotti for also inviting me to be here, and also for writing an essay to the publication that David presented just a while ago. I am a curator and a writer. And today I would like to speak about some of the challenges that the artistic and the cultural sector is facing with reference to the topics of this conference. I feel quite happy that already we have heard so many interesting, rich in content and informative positions. I myself have learned really a lot that address the role of education, of collaboration and innovation in the development of the creative sector, while having the sustainability principles in mind. Like now, what I would like to bring into the conversation with my talk is an emphasis on the following. Can we secure the sustainability of the cultural sector while also respecting the sustainability of the planet? This would be my first and most important question. Which practices might still be needed while we talk about innovation and development? And finally, what can approaches like the one of degrowth bring to this discourse? I have divided my talk in 3 parts so that it's easier to follow. Yeah, we'll start right away. So I guess no matter how optimist or pessimist we are, I think we have reached the stage that we would all agree that we live in rather uneasy times. We live in the shadow of a planetary emergency and a generalized crisis, when the present very much feels intolerable and the future sometimes feels even impossible. We are confronted with extreme weather phenomena, with resources depletion, with species extinction. And these are problems that not only us, but also that the generations that will follow will have to face. Now, different scholars from the fields of anthropology, sociology, have talked about this moment that we're living in by referring to it as a moment that we are invited to learn to live in the ruins. And this is oh, no, there's a lot of light, which is a nice thing, but not so good for the projection. So this is an image from a work that I really love by Superflux. It's an art and design studio in UK. It's a video which is called The Window View, and it's part of the Refuge for Resurgence. And what it captures is basically a city, an urban environment that has already fallen apart, and the living environment, the nature is taking over. Now, to start a bit, focusing a bit more on what I want to say. So different scholars have talked about the ruins. One of them that writes about it in a very beautiful way is Anna Ching. And this is a quotation from her book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, where she says that in a global state of precarity, we don't have choices other than looking for life in this ruin. More famously, most famously, you also might know Donna Haraway book and the work on staying with the trouble. Now, what is the trouble? What are the ruins? I think that it is quite clear that when we talk about ruins, these are basically the ruins of progress. These are the ruins of the so-called, in a way, modern world, a mostly privileged, Western, and careless world. And the growth that was imposed on the and a word that made progress a principle and a goal, and ignored the boundaries that were meant to be respected and set by the planet itself. I have here a quote by Maria Belén Sáez de Ibarra that specifically says that modernity naturalized concepts of finance, progress and growth imposed on the ways community, survival and of course life have long been understood. And the problem with growth is that our understanding of time also kind of changes, because time somehow then only becomes linear, time becomes money, time becomes velocity and acceleration, and different temporalities, different rhythms, different life circles are set aside, are not taken into consideration. So the problem with the ruins is that, of course, they are not safe places, and ruins are not the same for all of us. Ruins might be meant metaphorically, but they might also be meant very, very literally. But in any case, and what is important to underline, and in order to not start in a very depressing way, what these scholars like Anna Ching, Donna Haraway, also Isabel Stengers that I have here underline, is that we need and we can't find ways to learn to live in these ruins, even if a new world somehow is not possible. And what Isabel Stengers, for instance, here underlines is that somehow there is a great potential in tales, in rituals, in ways of thinking, in an attempt when we want to reward these ruins. And the attempt to reward these ruins means that we can also reach out to different worlds and to different temporalities again, anew. So moving on to the second part of my text now, I would like to talk a bit about what the growth can offer. I have to say that I'm not a specialist on the growth at all. I started reading specifically about it some months ago while trying to readdress my own curatorial practice and my own kind of way of working and living in this world. So this is a kind of a small disclaimer, but I will present what I found very interesting and how I think that can be of interest also in our context. Shortly, I should also mention that this is a still from work by Disnovation, who is an artistic duo that are working really a lot on the topic of growth. And they have developed an application where you can see the so-called growth, which is a GDP, and on the lower part you see the shadow, which is all the costs, all the impact that this so-called growth has on different sectors, on different lands, on the populations. So the term degrowth appeared first in the 70s, in the mid-70s, in a book called Écologie et politique, written by André Gorge. And what was highlighted already then with the word décroissance was somehow that there was an incompatibility with the so-called capitalist growth with planet's scarce resources. And there was a need to underline that unavoidably at some time human activity will find in the natural world its external limits. There's no way that this will not happen. And what is very interesting is that already back then in the mid-70s, Gortz writes that it's not so much growth itself that it's the problem, but the illusion which it sustains, this dynamic of ever-growing and ever-frustrated needs on which it is based, and the competition which it institutionalizes by inciting each individual to seek to rise above all the others. So already here it implies the problems that growth in relation to competition, in relation to optimization, brings along. And so the growth is to a great extent about respecting the limits of the planet. It's about also acknowledging the mutual dependencies on a social and ecological level, and it very much have to do with principles of conviviality and of coexistence. Interestingly, with the pandemic and the lockdowns, the growth became again quite a topic. And there was a moment, like at the first lockdown, that we thought that things could change. because it felt like that human activity had paused in a way. It felt like that the health was more important than the economic activity, and it felt like things could be done in a way differently. But of course, as soon as ways out were found, it became very clear that we needed to, or it was the idea that one needed to return to the normality of productivity and of progress. So now, having this in mind, I would like to go a bit into the arts field and briefly mention what happens there. So having this in mind, one could say that artists really reflect upon these topics. There's a lot of discussion nowadays about exploitation, about extractivism, about the sustainability principles. And these are like two exhibitions out of many that have specifically discussed degrowth. The first one happened back in 2011, and it was hosted at the Kunstverein Hanover, but also in two other venues in Germany. And it was called On the Metaphor of Growth. And it specifically had raised questions about how and why growth is understood as desirable and natural. And the second one that I have here as another example is an exhibition that took place at Savi Contemporary, an exhibition place in Berlin. That the show was called Raupenimmersatism, which, if I'm not mistaken, means the very hungry caterpillar. And it refers to the myth of endless consumption. And it exemplified the problematics of growth, but discussing very specifically the paradoxes that one finds when one lives in one of the most powerful economies in the country of Germany. So the list is long here, and I just want to say that, of course, there are many examples that we can discuss. And then there is one thing to discuss these topics in an exhibition context, and there is another kind of thing to really act on the background. For quite some years, there were a lot of contradictions when it came to environmental sustainability in artistic institutions, because there was such a footprint that was left for every one of these projects that were made. And luckily, we can say that in the last years, there is a lot of action taken, and there is a lot of transparency. And this, for instance, one of the most recent biennales, the Helsinki Biennale that just started this year, very interestingly paid special attention to aspects that have to do with traveling, with freight, with waste, something that many other institutions are doing as well. And this all possibly sounds great, and it is good, and it is very important. That's the way to go. Now, my question, though, is this enough? Is this enough? Because the paradox that we still have here and the contradiction that we still have is that we are still facing, at least in the fields of art that I'm working on, an overproduction. We have an overproduction of works, we have an overproduction of events, we have an overproduction of initiatives, and the funds are not necessarily enough for how much it is being produced. Artists keep wanting to and wishing for commissions, even when honoraria are not good enough. Curators need to come up with new ideas. Sometimes things just don't even work out. Institutions keep coming up with projects, and exhibitions or projects might just last for a few days or a couple of weeks. So somehow the logic of the gig economy made it through the cultural field, and a continuous pressure for new ideas, new works, new constellations came in. And when I was thinking a lot about that, and that something is still going very wrong, I came across this paper of Natasha Petrezin-Barceles, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, for slow institutions, which was published on eFlux a couple of years ago. And it is a very powerful and beautiful text that she specifically highlights the invitation to work differently, to slow down the ways of working and being, and to imagine new ecologies of care as a continuous practice of support, to listen with attention to feelings that arise from encounters with objects and subjects. And the question here is that if we want to be honest with ourselves, do we believe that we can really slow down? And can we really change space? Can we afford doing less without risking staying behind, without risking losing funds, without losing audiences, and so on? So at the last part of my talk, I want to bring in a couple of examples that I find interesting and inspiring. Quickly, I should say here that I use here the image of Chris de Decker, a very interesting practitioner that is publishing an online magazine called Low Tech Magazine. And this is a prototype that he has designed about one can generate energy at home. Now, to move on with my talk. So 3 different examples. I should also mention that this is where the need for different ways of learning and caring also come in. And maybe to return a bit to Isabel Stenger's, the theorist that I mentioned a while ago, I find it very interesting that while she refers to this aspect of living in the ruins, she says that this really demands a capacity to learn from and learn with, to care for what has been learned. And we talked already at this conference about learning and caring, and the thing is that these are words that imply power dynamics, of course. So it's different to learn from and to learn than to learn with. It's different to care for or to care with or to care about. So the question here is, how can we learn, care, and act otherwise? By acknowledging different kind of presence, different temporalities, and to sustain, to support the coexistence of plural experiences and knowledges. And what kind of paradigms could we bring in? What kind of models? So the first model that I would like to refer to, and I think it matches nicely with different examples that we heard already, has to do with how culture and agriculture are brought together. Sakiya is an initiative and a venue at Ramallah in Palestine. It was initiated some years ago by 2 architects, and their own pedagogical approach has to do with the organic connections, as they say, that one has to soil, to land, and to the environment. This is a picture from their website that you can have a look if you want. What is very interesting is that they talk about agriculture and they talk specifically about permaculture as well. And permaculture, of course, is an approach that greatly depends on observation, and that where time also plays a great role. So they embrace the principles of permaculture, and they also embrace the logic of the guild. And these are, this is an idea about the groupings of plants, trees, animals, and insects, and the ways that they operate together, and how they ensure health and productivity. So inspired by this logic of the guild, which is in a way their model, their starting point, they invite people from different backgrounds and generations to work together and to share their values and objectives. And they invite, let's say, artists, agroecologists, musicians, writers to work together. The second example is the initiative of the forest curriculum. This is initiated by an artist and a curator, Puhita Guha and Bijan Toto. And the interesting part is that in this case, the starting point is the forest, and more specifically, the Zomia forest, which is a zone that connects the South and Southeast Asia. And this is described as a field where different forms of life come together. So a bit like the Sakiya team works, they also see this as an environment where, as they say, swamps, leaves, mosquitoes, ghosts of the forest live together, where humans are no longer at the center. And as Guha, who has worked a lot on the forest, says, she believes that the forest is where fabulation happens, and the forest can be the paradigm, because it's a very dense ecology. And when it comes to their methodology, for them, the starting point is the writing of Fred Moten and Stefano Harni, and the work they have done on the undercommons, where they explain that we should no longer pay attention to the hierarchies of academic knowledge, but rather focus on the ways that we can be together, that we can share thoughts together, and we can learn together in homelessness and brokenness, as they put it. So taking this in mind, they kind of create, let's say, events that are, in a way, encounters. They are encounters that people can learn and spend time. And sometimes, because I asked them at some point, so what do you aim with these workshops? What do you aim with these events? And they said, people spend time together. They talk, they interact, and something happens. Even if something might not happen, still there will be a very valuable experience. So it's not so much about the final outcome, let's say. And yeah, this is a still from an online talk that they gave, where they discuss forest as curatorial practice. And finally, the last example is from the Laboratory for Aesthetics and Ecology, which is formed by 2 curators and 1 editor. And this is a platform, I think all of them come from Denmark, that again, like the forest curriculum in a way, they pay a lot of attention to symbiosis, to forms of coexistence, and to a we that brings together humans, plants, animals, and specifically they're interested in what they call transspecies encounters. If for the 2 examples that I brought before, the starting point was, let's say, the land or the soil and the forest, here the starting point for them is the word ecology, and they return to this word like it's translated in Greek, that ekos has to do with home, and they approach home by talking about the planet itself, and how we need to kind of return to this idea of what our home really is and how we respect it. Their events take place always out in the open, by the sea, on the land, or in different places and surroundings. And most recently, they got a prize for a work that it's called Hosting Lands Between the Ruin, the Field and the Forest. And this is, I think, let's see how it will go, but this is a very kind of interesting project, because they want to do a slowly growing and decentralized exhibition that will unfold over a period of 3 years at 6 different locations, and it will be developed in relation to local initiatives and local people in Denmark. And they hope that this will become an example for other curators and initiatives. So now, taking these examples that I brought in mind, I think it is interesting to pay attention to their starting points, like, as I said, the land, the forest, ecology, like the planet, and also to pay attention to how all these initiatives, these three platforms and initiatives, do not have something like a defined outcome, a fixed plan, a specific target. It is, in a way, it is more open. It is not outcome-oriented, but this is how also the understanding of time changes. And this is how they also aim to create and sustain bonds between individuals, between communities, between species, and between worlds. And within this context, they also allow time for observation. They also allow time for acknowledgement. And maybe to return a bit to degrowth, I have here a quote by Vincent Ligge and Anita Nelson. This is a book published 2 years ago called Exploring Degrowth. It's a very interesting book that says that embracing degrowth is an invitation to go on the inevitably long journey of the decolonization of our growth imaginaries, moving from cultural awareness to a systemic and material transformation, changing our everyday practice. Or in other words, I would say that it is basically about changing our habits, changing how we think about how we work and live. I'm not saying that we should work less, although this would not be a bad idea. I'm saying that we should work differently, and we should find different ways to collaborate with each other. And even we might even have to be a bit more careful with using the word sustainability. I recently was reading a text by artist Carolina Caicedo, who said that we should rather talk about sustenance and not sustainability, because we should talk about how we need to find sources of strength, sources of nourishment, and whereas sustainability in a way implies some sort of continuous exploitation possibly. So this is what I wanted to say. I think we should try as much as possible to escape contradictions and to move towards a reality where we can have open discussion about what growth really means, how environmental goals can be reached, and also how we working in the creative and cultural sector feel in a way safe and secure. Thank you very much.